Good afternoon. My name is Tim Lyons, Executive Vice President of Lyons Companies, and on behalf of everyone at our firm, welcome to the 2025 Economic Forecast. This is the 18th time Lyons has hosted this event, and in addition to educating the community on economic trends and issues, we do it to draw attention to the work and accomplishments of the Center of Economic Education and Entrepreneurship at the Lerner College of Business. For those of you who are attending for the first time, this event was originally started by my father, David Lyons, to educate our employees on the economic trends that impact our clients. Over time, the event developed a great amount of interest and attention from both our clients and the broader business community in Delaware. It's now grown to a 300-plus attendee event that we have here today, and with a history of amazing high-profile speakers, thanks in no small part to our great friend, Michael Farr. Before we move forward, I'd like to share some recent and exciting news. We officially announced today that in January, our firm joined NFP, an Aon company. Throughout our history, we have focused on opportunities that make us better for our clients and our employees. NFP shares that same philosophy that was important to our father, David Lyons. Dad always said, do what's best for the client. And moving forward, that's going to be continuing to move forward with NFP. As a part of NFP, we'll continue to bring value to our clients and be able to bring comprehensive solutions to those needs. But most importantly, our team at Lyons isn't changing, and the same people will be working that have been working on with our clients will continue to be there. Unfortunately, that means that some of you will have to continue to work with my brother Dave, but you can talk to me about that later after the event. We're excited for this next chapter with NFP, and yes, this event will continue in 2026 and into the future. Please reach out to me or my brother with questions at the end of the day. We'll be happy to answer them. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Carlos Asarda, Director of the Center for Economic Education and Entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Thanks to Lyons Companies, our speakers, for spending time with us today and sharing your insights on what's going to happen in the economy and, of course, the University of Delaware. The James B. O'Neill Award for Excellence in Economic Education and Entrepreneurship was created to recognize an individual who has made substantial contributions to promoting economic, personal finance, and entrepreneurship education. The selection committee includes the Dean of the Lerner College of Business and Economics, a senior member of the Department of Economics here at the university, the chair, vice chair, and one more member of the Delaware Council on Economic Education, last year's recipient, Greg Lavelle, and myself. As former president of the University of Delaware, our award recipient played a key role in the decision to hire and support a new center director. That's me, and I know because the offer letter had his signature. So it was really nice. Thank you. Demonstrating his strong commitment to advancing economic education not only in Delaware but nationwide. His support continued during his current tenure as president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, where he has been an advocate for economic and personal finance education at different levels. And we do have a very strong partnership with the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. One course we offer in Delaware is Keys to Financial Success, and we have more than 4,000 high school students taking that class every year here in our state. Under his leadership, the bank has launched a wide range of initiatives, including teacher training programs, research into the effectiveness of curricula and curriculum development. Worth noting is the fact that he has consistently, and I want to emphasize that, made himself available to speak with educators. Imagine being a K-12 teacher. You go to the Fed, you're already super excited because you're geeky about economics, and all of a sudden comes the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia to talk to you as if he was just one more educator in the room. It's amazing. I get goosebumps just saying that, and you can't fake goosebumps. I don't know if you know that. Sit there and say, I want to get goosebumps. It's not going to happen, all right? Moreover, he has supported the teaching of economics and personal finance into K-16 classrooms and has further expanded outreach efforts to the general public through the bank's exhibits. I would like to highlight that he has consistently demonstrated strong willingness to assist us even under the most demanding circumstances. For example, his keynote contributions to the economic forecast have provided valuable insights to all of us here in our education communities. And I can't wait to hear his remarks today, particularly in the current environment that we're all navigating. Furthermore, he has responded to inquiries promptly, including the time when he was returning from an extended work trip. Picture this. It is a Saturday. It is his birthday. And as he's walking into his home, he picked up the phone and gave me a call. That tells you who he really is. And that's a true story, just in case somebody thinks I made it up. It was amazing. I get a phone call, I'm like, whoa. Clearly, this exemplifies his exceptional dedication to our work and education. That dedication has made a tremendous difference supporting our goal to see students graduate as informed and productive citizens, contributing to their own prosperity and that of the well-being of the world. We are grateful for your invaluable contributions to the state of Delaware and our nation, and are delighted to formally recognize you, President Patrick Harker, as the 2025 recipient of the James B. O'Neill Award for Excellence in Economic Education and Entrepreneurship.
Want a photo first?
After you.
Okay. Wow, I'm really touched, honestly. Jim, where's Jim? There he is. There are people that really you run into in life that, I'm going to say more in my formal remarks, by the way, so I'm going to keep this short. I figured I get the podium twice, so I don't want to go on long speeches twice, but there are people that really touch you in life and the dedication they have to what they do. And I was looking at the list of all the recipients. It's a great list, an incredible list. And I'm just honored to be part of that list. But at the top of that list is Jim. I mean, we wouldn't be here without him. I'm going to say more in a few minutes about this, but this work is incredibly important. The young people in this country, and I would say more generally the country, we need this education. We need to understand how the economy works. We are the economy. And we make decisions collectively as American citizens. And they should be informed by what we know works and what doesn't work. And that's why this education, these fundamentals, are important for people's lives so that they can build the family and the life they want through personal finance, but also just as informed citizens to know how things work so they can make informed decisions as we collectively decide our future. So again, I am really, really touched by this. And as I said, I'm going to be back in a little bit to talk a little bit more. I have some things to say about Carlos, so I'll be back.
It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Nick Timmeros. Nick is the Chief Economics Correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, where he covers the Federal Reserve and U.S. economic policy. Please join me in welcoming Nick. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for having me back this year. Patrick's giving 2 speeches, so he gets to have 2 introductions too. Our first speaker will be Patrick Harker. He's the 11th president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. It's a position he assumed in July 2015. In this role, Patrick participates on the Interest Rate Setting Federal Open Market Committee. Of course, he was president of the University of Delaware before that. And prior to that, he was dean and professor of management and private enterprise at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. In 1991, he was the youngest faculty member in Wharton's history to be awarded an endowed professorship. So I welcome back to the stage Patrick Harker.
I'm back, like a bad penny, I'm back, as long as there still is a penny. So really, good afternoon. And first, as we begin this more formal, this part of the agenda, the economic outlook, I really want to thank the Lyons Companies. And also the Alfred Lerner College of Business and Economics for putting this on year after year, and the incredible job you all do. And thank all the sponsors, all the organizers. You make this event possible, so really thank you. And of course, I thank all of you for attending. We wouldn't have it unless you were here, so really looking forward to the conversation we're going to be having. I took note, though, that the first edition of this convening was held in 2006, which would make today's the 20th annual event. So I further offer my congratulations on this milestone. And really, this is a great thing you do for this community. So I do look forward to the discussion with Cristian and Michael that will follow my remarks. But I also can't understate how much of a pleasure it is to be once again on this great campus of the University of Delaware. Serving as the president of this institution holds a very, very special place in my heart and in my professional history. So I'm really thankful to be back. Throughout my tenure, I aspired when I was here to lead through the university's motto. We should do a pop quiz to see who knows what the university. Knowledge is the light of the mind. In many ways, those words were the inspiration for us when the decision was made to purchase a shuttered auto manufacturing facility and convert it into this space we find ourselves in today. Many future careers have been ignited here. The Star campus remains to me one of my proudest achievements here at UD. And I am a little reminiscent and a little misty-eyed because there's a reason for that. As you may know, at the end of June, I will reach the Federal Reserve's time and service limits as president and CEO of the Philadelphia Fed. And as I contemplate that retirement, it's kind of giving me an opportunity to look back over the course of my career. Or quite possibly, it's looking around my office at all the books, framed mementos, accumulated knickknacks that I need to find a lot of boxes, right, for that. And that's jogging me as I start to sort through those, jogging me down memory lane. Also, as today marks my last formal visit to the first state as president of the Philadelphia Fed, I ask you for one final time to bear with me and listen to the Fed disclaimer. So the views I am about to express are my own and do not necessarily reflect those of anyone else in the Federal Reserve System or my colleagues on the Federal Open Market Committee. There. Again, the rule is you can say Pat said, you can't say the Fed said. That's the rule. So let's start. So before getting into my economic outlook, allow me, though, again to express my real appreciation in being presented with the James P. O'Neill Award for Excellence in Economic Education and Entrepreneurship. It really, to me, is a special honor. Jim's vision to equip teachers to better teach economics in their own classrooms has made a profound contribution to economic education for thousands of students here in Delaware and really all around the world. The Master of Arts in Economics and Entrepreneurship for Educators, that's a mouthful, MAEE program that he created has prepared hundreds of teachers to be the nation's economic education leaders. In fact, economic education staff at many reserve banks, including in Philadelphia, and at councils and centers for economic education across the country, have either graduated from this program, been mentored by Jim, or otherwise been touched by his work. Jim's commitment to equipping teachers to be the field's force multipliers has ensured that generations of elementary, middle, and high school students have learned economics, personal finance, and entrepreneurship before they graduated. I think about none of the work I've ever undertaken, whether as a professor, a dean, a university president, or president of the Philly Fed, has ever been in pursuit of earning some sort of award. To me, it's actually seeing the students succeed, institutions succeed, the public succeed, and hopefully our society as a whole, our nation as a whole, prosper through that work. And the little piece I can do there has been really rewarding. Additionally, though, but this reward is really special because I also know I did not earn this on my own. This is really not on my own. At every step and in every phase, I've been lucky, really lucky, to have numerous professionals around me upon whom I could rely on to see that common vision come to fruition. This is true especially of my time here at UD, as well as the Philly Fed. No, I didn't wake up one morning and build the Star Center, this campus. It took a huge team to make what you see around here happen. And likewise at the Philly Fed, I have not single-handedly done the work of producing the materials that are used in countless classrooms throughout the 3rd District to educate students on the Federal Reserve System and its role in the nation's economy. Nor have I single-handedly maintained the Philly Fed's exhibit that informs thousands of individuals visiting our bank. And we're expecting the 250th anniversary of America. We're right in the historic center of this nation. So we're looking for a crowd to be coming at us. And I think about that team and Carlos's role in this team. That was a great letter I signed, Carlos. You know, it was because he has continued Jim's legacy of building this program and having a real impact. You know, we often think of education may be an individual pursuit, and sometimes it's a lonely pursuit. But it does pay societal dividends, and I hope that's something we never lose sight of. It's hard. Education's hard, but it pays off. So again, I am really honored and humbled to have been named this year's recipient. But I am even more privileged to share this recognition with all those people I work with here and in the Fed to make it possible. So thank you so much for this honor. So now let me change gears and talk about the economy and my economic outlook. So let's start at the top. Let's start with the issue that I know is very much top of mind, inflation. To be sure, while we have certainly made progress in our work to get our annual personal consumption expenditure inflation, or PCE, back to our annual target of 2%, inflation continues to remain elevated. And regardless of whether you've been following the news or paying attention to prices at the store, you also know that inflation is taking us as monetary policymakers on a bit of a bumpy ride. In fact, over the shorter term of the last several months, progress toward the 2% target has slowed. And that was even before January's Consumer Price Index, the CPI, surprised us on the upside. But, and I want to emphasize, but, if you take a quick look at history, you will see that the January CPI inflation has surprised us on the upside more often than not. In fact, it has done so 9 out of the past 10 Januaries. To repeat what I said at a conference last week, 5 days after the CPI's release, my belief is that seasonal adjustments are struggling to keep up with the fast-changing economy. You don't miss on that upside 9 out of 10 times. So there's much more that can be gleaned by looking at longer-term trends, not just 1 month, not just a specific moment in time. But what does that mean? What does that mean for monetary policy? Over the last 4 months of 2024, we reduced the policy interest rate to its current range of 4.25 to 4.5%. And that is where it stands after our decision during this year's first FOMC meeting to hold steady with the rate. And I really believe that was the right call. The policy rate remains restrictive enough to continue putting downward pressure on inflation over the longer term, as we need it to do, while not negatively impacting the rest of the economy. And the caution I am taking is to look at all the data and not to be moved to act in either direction based on one report covering 1 month. We have to incorporate more information. So, if you'll allow me an oversimplified analogy, take the Philadelphia Eagles season. Yes, EAGLES. Remember, we're celebrating, but remember they opened the season up with a bumpy 2-2, trading wins and losses across 4 weeks. But the team didn't panic and stuck to its game plan and let that play out over the entire season. And I'd say that it ended rather successfully, even if it gave us fans, diehard fans, some moments of real stress and anxiety. So that said, I am taking a similar posture when it comes to monetary policy. In other words, Let's stick to the game plan. Now, certainly there are outside factors, and we'll probably be talking about those, that are throwing in uncertainty, some uncertainty, including changing policies in Washington or elsewhere around the world that may have an impact on inflation dynamics. There are also situations such as the bird flu epidemic, which is decimating egg production and leading to higher prices on the shelves. And I really don't think I need to talk about the importance of poultry to you, if you're from Delaware. This is an incredibly important industry for this state. But this is why we watch data and react if we must. Again, I'm in a position of letting monetary policy to continue to work. There's lots of things happening, but we don't know exactly which way things are going to go. So we need to let monetary policy continue to do its work. Why do I think that? First, labor markets have largely returned to balance, and the economy is creating jobs at roughly the rate it was in the months and years immediately prior to the pandemic. Now, yes, the number of monthly new jobs is lower than what we had seen through much of the past 4 years. But it's really important. I would not confuse deceleration with decline. I would not confuse deceleration with decline. We came out of the pandemic at a full sprint, a pace which was unsustainable over the long run. We're now settling into a solid pace. We haven't stopped, and we're certainly not moving backward. And we're seeing that right here in this state, in Delaware, where the unemployment rate sits about where it was prior to the pandemic. Payroll employment continues to move in a positive direction, though at a slower rate than it was previously, and unemployment claims remain low in Delaware. Second, GDP growth, while moderating, likewise remains in growth territory. Consumer spending over the longer run has remained positive, buoying GDP, though it does present some concerns. Whether they advance beyond concerns are yet to be seen. They are concerns. They're risks. But we don't know if they're going to advance beyond that. But my concern, nonetheless, for example, rests in credit cards, which is, of course, another critical industry for this state. The data we have at the Philly Fed tells us that more than 1 in 10 credit card accounts, they're currently only being maintained through balance holders making only the minimum monthly payment, 1 in 10. This is not necessarily flashing red to me. It's not a red light yet, but it's definitely a yellow one. Now look, not every minimum payment is a precursor to a missed payment. Not every account is destined to fall into delinquency. Some consumers surely will cure their accounts and clear their balances. But the data clearly tell us that many consumers are under stress. They are really under stress in managing their finances in the midst of higher than target inflation. So I think this is a space worth keeping an eye on, and I will, very closely as we go forward. All in all, given those reasons, I see an American economy that's entering this year, 2025, in a position of relative health and strength, despite inflation being above target. And I believe the same thing holds true here in Delaware's economy. Now, I mentioned the unemployment picture a few moments ago, but overall business conditions, as measured by the Philadelphia Fed's state coincident indices, a summary metric of economic activity, continue to signal green, which is a good thing, of course. Delaware's coincident index increased 3.1% through 2024, above the U.S. average of 2.7%, and well above the other states in the 3rd district. New Jersey was 2.3%, Pennsylvania was at 2%. Remember, Delaware is 3.1%. So from that measure, Delaware is doing well. Moreover, new business applications in Delaware remain at a high level, averaging nearly 5,000 per month as of December's numbers. Leading up to the pandemic, that number was about 2,000 per month. So a lot of activity in business formation. So before I and my FOMC colleagues return to Washington in mid-March for our next meeting, what are we going to learn? Well, we're going to receive an additional unemployment report, plus 2 inflation reports, one each of CPI and PCE, among a host of other economic data. We're going to be getting more data. And I will certainly be looking for any emerging trends, and I will certainly do what I can to block out any noise, or at least to ascertain where that noise is coming from. But again, from the macro view, the data I currently see allows me to provide an economic outlook that is optimistic, maybe cautiously optimistic, despite the ongoing challenges of getting inflation back to target. Yet, the data also help me understand why on the micro level, that's at the macro level. At the micro level, not every American family or business may be feeling this way. They're not feeling a similar optimism. They feel inflation, and they feel it in very, very real terms. Many see housing prices which remain out of reach. And I'd note here that Delaware as a whole is struggling with home affordability as measured by the Atlanta Fed's Home Ownership Affordability Monitor. So as policymakers, we still have a lot of work to do. And even though my time is limited, just slightly more than 120 days, I am going to remain committed to the task ahead until my retirement. And moreover, I know the Philly Fed staff, to whom I turn for guidance, will be keeping to the task as well. But we certainly cannot do it alone. Yes, the hard data we take in on a regular basis tells us a lot about the state of the economy, and we get lots of that data. But those numbers are so often presented in stark black and white, right? The world is not drawn in black and white. That's not the reflection of what real people, all of you, all of us, are experiencing. For the past near decade, I have relied on context up and down and across the 3rd District to provide me and my team with the soft data that turns black and white into living color. In some ways, every conversation I or someone else at the Philly Fed has with you or your colleagues helps to fill in those empty corners. Through you, we have been able to get a much more vibrant picture of economic conditions across not just Delaware, but also southern New Jersey and eastern and central Pennsylvania. What's important about that is that we are the smallest Federal Reserve district by area, which means an economy happening in one corner of the 3rd District may not be an independent event, but can have a ripple effect all the way to the other corner. We are a very close-knit district. Your reports on conditions as you see them allow us to track those ripples from the moment they are first felt so that we can work accordingly for the benefit not just of Delaware, but of the entire district. So I can't thank you enough for your insights. I can't thank you enough, and my team, and we can't thank you enough for never being shy about your thoughts and opinions. I cannot thank you enough for the way in which you've always welcomed me and others from the Philly Fed into your communities for in-depth discussions on what you're seeing, what you're hearing, and what you think we need to take a look at too. What's new? Where do you think we'll get more insights? These insights aren't just invaluable to us at the Philly Fed, but I take them directly to the FOMC conference table as well. And I think that's where I'm going to wind down here, my prepared remarks, and take my seat after Nick comes back up for our discussion. So thank you. Thank you again for inviting me. This really means a lot to me, coming back here for this annual event and for this award. But even more so, I want to thank you again for all that Delaware has meant to me over the past 18 years. There's always going to be a part of me that's going to be a fighting blue hen. Go Hens.
Thank you, Pat. Our next speaker is Cristian deRitis. Chris is a senior director and deputy chief economist at Moody's Analytics. When I started at the Journal, I was covering the housing crisis, and if you needed good private sector, there's a lot of disaggregated data on housing, I would always call up Chris and his colleagues at Moody's because they had all these numbers at their fingertips. Now, before joining Moody's Analytics, Chris worked for Fannie Mae and taught at Johns Hopkins University. He received his PhD in economics from Johns Hopkins and is named on 2 U.S. patents for credit modeling techniques. So I turn the stage over to Chris.
Very good. Thank you, Nick, for that very kind introduction. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for allowing me some time here to provide you with this economic outlook. It's a very tough act to follow, Patrick Harker. So my only saving grace is that I have some slides. So I'm going to be adding some pictures to many of the key points that Patrick made. Also understand that in the interest of time, folks want to get to the Q&A. So I'm going to really focus on 3 key points when it comes to the economy, and then we can go a little bit deeper as we go into the Q&A. First of all, I want to provide a bit of a baseline economic outlook. So echoing many of the points that Patrick made in terms of the momentum that we still have in this economy, and a lot of that should carry us forward throughout this year. The second key point, though, will be around the distributional effects of the economy, right? We talk about the economy in broad strokes, broad pictures, but there is a significant bifurcation that's going on among households. And so it's important to recognize that bifurcation, not only in terms of the impact on those specific households, but then what that implies for the broader economic outlook. And then finally, I want to focus on some of the key risks to this outlook. There's a boatload of uncertainty in the economy, obviously, a lot of economic turbulence. So how should we be organizing our thoughts around that turbulence, around those uncertainties, and develop a framework to allow us to manage that uncertainty going forward and come up with perhaps some better forecasts of what could occur going forward. So with that, let me dive right in to my first slide here. And the first point to make is that, again, we entered 2025 with a great deal of momentum. GDP growth in 2024 was relatively strong. Our labor market is continuing to deliver. We're adding hundreds of thousands of jobs to the economy every month. You can see that on the left-hand side of the slide here. The fact is that as Patrick alluded to, the growth rate of job growth has been decelerating. That's obvious from the chart here, but still at an average of over 200,000 jobs per month, that is still a very healthy and robust labor market. Now that said, if you dig a little bit deeper into the data, you do find some causes for concern. First of all, this job growth is a bit narrower now than it used to be, right? Although we see social services, healthcare, retail, trade continuing to add a lot of jobs, construction, manufacturing, warehousing and transportation are lagging, right? So it's not as robust or broad-based as a labor market as we had before. We also see employers being much more circumspect or cautious in terms of expansion of employment going forward. They're pulling back on temporary workers, often a sign of more caution going forward. And if you've spoken to any recent college graduate, they'll tell you that certainly this year's labor market was a bit tougher than previous years, right? A little harder to find a job. But we still have more job openings than unemployed. We have about 1.1 jobs per unemployed individual. And so we still have quite a robust labor market. Maybe it takes a little bit more time. Job seekers have to be a little bit more persistent. But nonetheless, the underlying job growth is still there. Even more important for households, though, is the chart on the right. And this represents weekly unemployment insurance claims, a number that comes out every Thursday, and essentially reflects the number of layoffs that are going on in the economy. And what we see here is that while businesses, corporations may not be hiring with abandon, they aren't resorting to layoffs either, right? At least not wide-scale layoffs. They may be trimming around the edges, they may be repositioning their companies, given some uncertainty going forward, but we don't see the type of layoffs that would be consistent with the recession. Now, we did get a number this morning, as I mentioned. That number was a bit elevated, but it's 1 week. We don't want to overreact here, and there are some very valid reasons to believe that we'll probably will see unemployment insurance claims rising a bit over the next few weeks here, given the job cuts that are going on among federal workers. Nonetheless, we remain at very low levels based on our history. If we at around 225,000 unemployment job claims on average. If we were to start to see this number trending up to say 275 or 300,000 per week, that's certainly the time to get fearful or worried that perhaps there is going to be slower growth or perhaps even a recession. We're still far from that bound. And so again, that is one reason why a household may be a little bit more optimistic, if you will, in terms of labor market prospects at this point than they may have been a few years ago or prior to the recession, or prior to the pandemic, pardon me. Now, that brings us to the one real blemish on the economic scorecard, again, as Patrick mentioned, which is inflation, right? The inflation rate remains high, 3 3% or so, based on either the consumer price index or personal consumption expenditure index, right? Certainly, we've made a lot of progress since the peaks back in 2022, but we have seen a stalling out of that progress over the last 18, 24 months here, right? As either the blue or the green lines on the chart can show you. That inflation has been sticky or persistent for a variety of reasons, but perhaps the main reason has been the persistence of shelter cost inflation. Housing costs, rental costs have remained elevated. In fact, if you stripped out shelter costs from the calculations, I know journalists, the public hates it when economists do this, but if you bear with me for a moment, because obviously shelter costs matter, but if you do strip out shelter costs, you actually see from the light blue line that inflation has actually been right around the Fed's 2% target for quite a while. It's been that persistence of those shelter costs, the fact that we had such a sharp run up in house prices and rental growth in the early days of the pandemic that has just taken time to make its way into the official statistics. The good news here, though, is that as you look at market rents, you look at other data sources, you see that rents have actually gone flat across the country, and in some markets they've actually declined. So that market signal in terms of rent growth should make its way into the official statistics over the course of the next year and put downward pressure on the inflation rate. So our expectation is you will continue to see a slow but steady downward path towards the Fed's 2% target over the course of the next 12 to 24 months. Now, this is the baseline. I'll get to some of the key risks, but given what we see in the economy today, it does appear that inflation is continuing to be on the mend. The one caveat I would point out here is if you continue to stare at the chart, you look at the last 3 to 6 months, it does look as though there is some acceleration or potential reacceleration going on in the inflation rates. And you do see certain prices, such as homeowners insurance, auto insurance, even the price of vehicles, gas prices, or food prices most recently, that are worrisome. So clearly we have to keep a close eye on inflation, but assuming those are more temporary factors, our expectation is we will continue to see the slow but steady decline here. Now, given this narrative, we can then focus on interest rates. And clearly the interest rate environment has broad implications both for households as well as businesses. Now, Patrick, I noticed you didn't give any forecasts in your discussion. I don't know if that was intentional, but I'm in the professional forecasting business, so I have to put down a number or put down some paths here. So in our expectation, in terms of reading the tea leaves of what the Fed governors have been up to, our expectation is that the Fed funds rate is likely to remain flat, or the Fed is likely to remain on pause here throughout the next 6 to 9 months of the year. Right? There is just too much uncertainty when it comes to the inflation rate, as I mentioned, right? Perhaps my narrative will be correct, and if so, we'll continue to see that downward trend, and certainly the Fed governors will respond to that. But there is also, of course, the specter of uncertainty from policies and other factors in the economy as well. So the best course of action, typically given uncertainty, is to wait, see what happens, and then make a decision based on additional information. So our expectation is the economy will continue to evolve as I've described. By September, though, we might start to see some threats to our labor market. Right? I mentioned there are a few cracks in the pavement, if you will. Although things are strong, there are some areas of concern here. By September, given this higher for longer interest rate environment, we could start to see more and more pain being felt within that labor market. And if the inflation rate is coming down at that point, then certainly the Fed would have the cover it needs to go ahead and start taking that first cut. So our expectation is a cut in September and then a quarter-point cut every quarter throughout 2026 to get to an equilibrium of 3%. I'm not going to go into details about the equilibrium. If you want to ask during the Q&A, happy to do so, but that, of course, is another symposium, if you want, in terms of what that equilibrium should be. Other interest rates, based on our analysis, should follow suit. So the 3-month, 2-year Treasury rate should continue to move in along that downward trajectory. The 10-year Treasury rate, by our reckoning, is already at equilibrium, about 4 to 4.5%, given the strength of the rest of the economy. The 30-year fixed rate mortgage would have a gradual return back down to around 6% over time. That certainly will be helpful to address some of that affordability issue that was mentioned earlier, but it's certainly not enough to engender a housing boom of any sort. So that decline really is just helping to keep pace, if you will, with some of the other pressures that continue in the housing market. The one rate that sticks out here, perhaps, that's worth mentioning is our projection for the rate on high-yield corporate debt. Right? This is debt, of course, to companies with riskier balance sheets, more highly leveraged balance sheets. You can see that this is the only rate that we actually project to go up over this time period. Right now, high-yield corporate debt spreads are incredibly tight, incredibly low. Bond investors are expecting or pricing the economy to be performing to perfection, very low default risk. Our belief is that over time, as the economy does normalize, and we do get some slowing in the economy, those spreads will start to normalize as well. We'll start to see some gapping out of the corporate debt, high-yield corporate debt spreads to something that's more consistent with history, so bringing them back up to about a 10% level over the course of the next couple of years. That too will be a bit of a break in terms of economic growth. Those higher rates in those sectors could lead to some slowdown in terms of business investment. And again, consistent with this idea that the economy is going to move gradually towards a new equilibrium. Okay, so that's point one. So a slowing but growing economy. Clearly there are some headwinds here when we think about that interest rate environment and what I mentioned about inflation. The labor market remains strong though. However, as we move to point two, we really need to focus on households. Households and household consumption continues to drive the economy. About 2/3 of our economy is driven by consumption. And when we step back and look at the macro picture of households, we actually can feel pretty good. Households have about $160 trillion in net worth, an all-time record high. That's a $50 trillion increase, over a $50 trillion increase since 2020, since the start of the pandemic. About half of that wealth increase has been due to the appreciation of house prices. About half of that has been due to the appreciation of stock values or equity values, financial market wealth. Right? So overall, that's been a real positive. Increase in wealth is typically associated with a so-called wealth effect, where households feel or observe that their assets are appreciating, will go out and do some additional spending, decide that they can afford to save less in order to finance that spending. And this has been a significant reason why the U.S. economy has performed so much better than countries around the globe. This asset appreciation has fueled this wealth effect, whereas in countries in Europe or Asia, you see households that have had to pull back. They are certainly much more precautionary about the future. They haven't seen their asset values rise, and therefore their economies haven't grown nearly as quickly as the U.S. has. So that's a true positive, of course, for the U.S. economy, the strength of the consumer balance sheet, the willingness to continue to spend. But we need to dig a little bit deeper here. And as we dig into the data, what we find, of course, is that this wealth increase is far from equally distributed. It's been highly skewed towards higher income households, particularly when we think about stock market or equity market wealth. The housing wealth is a bit more evenly distributed, but that too tends to be more focused on middle to higher income households. The bottom third of households by income typically are renters, right? So they haven't participated in any type of house price appreciation. And of course, they don't have typically any exposure to the stock market. So it truly is an economy that is running on two tracks here. And you can see that very clearly in my next slide here. If you look at personal outlays or spending by income group, and you index that back to the values back in 2019, you can see that households in the high income group, the top 20% of households by income, have seen their spending increase by close to 155 or close to 55% higher than what it was in 2019, right? And so they have again been able to dip into their savings or decide to save less in order to finance their spending, and they've brought that spending upward. The bottom 80% of households have had a very different picture. Their spending has only increased by about 25% over this time period. And we know over this time period, inflation has also only increased about 20-25% as well. So it's that low middle income household that has just been keeping up with inflation, hasn't really seen an acceleration in their spending. Our spending growth has come nearly entirely from that higher income category. They are the ones that have accelerated spending over this time period. They are the ones that are responsible for much of that consumption growth that then has fed into broader economic growth. So, of course, this does have implications for the two groups themselves, right? Again, this point or this forecast I make about the economy continuing to grow and continuing to be quite robust may fall on some deaf ears when you're talking to some of the lower to middle income households. They're saying, what are you talking about? My economic situation is no better than it was years ago. In fact, I may have had to deplete my savings during the pandemic just to keep up with inflation rates, right? The higher income households in a very different place, right? All-time record highs when it comes to their wealth. Not only does this have implications then for those two groups, but also for the overall economy. The fact that our economy is so tied to the outlook for higher income households introduces a level of vulnerability that I'll talk about in a moment. Okay, before I move on to those, some of those key risks, just to close the parenthesis when it comes to households and some of the stress that our lower income households are facing, we can take a look at delinquency rates across different consumer credit products. And we're looking here at data from Equifax consumer credit reports. And when you see these delinquency rates, what's of course is quite striking is the level of delinquency on both auto loans and especially credit card loans. We're at very high levels, certainly much higher levels than we had prior to the pandemic, prior to 2019. In the case of credit cards, you can see a very interesting dynamic in the sense that delinquency rates fell dramatically in the early days of the pandemic as consumers had stimulus checks to pay down debt or certainly weren't spending or incurring additional debt at the levels that they were previously. That sent their credit scores upward and allowed them to actually tap into additional credit that they needed in the subsequent years to deal with elevated levels of inflation. As the economy has adjusted and as those savings have been depleted, you've seen that the delinquency rates on credit cards have risen to these elevated levels. A similar story can be told for the auto loan sector as well. There too, auto loan or vehicle prices rose throughout this period. Right? If you needed to buy a car, you didn't have many options other than getting a loan, and you have seen a similar dynamic in terms of those delinquency rates rising. So there is real financial pain being felt by households across the country, even if the macro picture looks pretty good, even if the labor market overall continues to hold. The one glimmer of hope that we have is that as we look at those credit card portfolios, we are starting to see those delinquency rates come in. Right? Lenders have responded by tightening up their lending standards. Consumers are getting back on track in terms of their savings and spending relationship. And so we are starting to see some normalization here. And our expectation is as long as the rest of the economy holds, you will continue to see that normalization over the next couple of years here. But it won't be quick. It will continue to drag on many balance sheets. The other lines on the chart here for first mortgages and HELOCs tell a somewhat different story. Right? Here we have delinquency rates that remain very low relative to history, relative to where we were in 2019. We have seen those delinquency rates rising now, but those delinquencies have really been coming from certain sectors or segments of the population of mortgages. It's been the FHA loans or loans to individuals with lower incomes or lower credit scores. So there are pockets of risk out there, but if you look at the mortgage market more broadly, you actually can see that their performance remains quite solid. So with that, let me turn to the third point I'd like to make, which is around the risks here. There is bifurcation in the economy, and on top of that, what we have is an environment of heightened uncertainty. You can see this in any number of surveys that you might want to take a look at, whether you look at household surveys, business surveys, or surveys of small businesses. They all tell you that, gee, I just don't know about the future. There's just too many things going on. I'm just very uncertain about the labor market, about the general economy, about inflation, right? There are just all these different policies and all these different factors going on. I just don't know. And that uncertainty can have a very chilling effect on the economy. So uncertainty itself becomes a risk factor when it comes to the economy. Households pull back on their spending. Businesses take a wait-and-see approach to investment. And so that can already lead to slower growth, potentially even a recession if that spending pullback is dramatic. To help us organize our thoughts around all this uncertainty, though, and all the threats that might be out there, my team at Moody's has come up with a risk matrix approach. Right? So on the chart here, you can see various threats to the economy that we identify every month. And then our estimation of both the probability or likelihood of each one of those threats, that's what's on the y-axis, and then the severity of those threats, that's what you can see on the x-axis here. Right? So how damaging would these threats be if they actually were to occur to the US macroeconomy? And you should think about severity in so-called present value terms. That is, if you have a threat that occurs far off into the future, although it may be large, for example, climate change transition risk in the lower left-hand corner, once you discount it back to today, when you account for the fact that it is a distant risk, it becomes less salient or less severe relative to some other more pressing threats that are out there. And what this exercise does is allow us to organize our thoughts around risk and around threats, help us to worry a bit more intelligently, if you will, in terms of the future. What should we prioritize? What should we deprioritize? The threats that we typically would want to pay close attention to, or more attention to at least, would be those in the upper right-hand corner. These are threats with higher than average severity, higher than average likelihood of occurrence. So global trade war for us is a significant risk factor. If we actually did get into a full-scale global trade war, that would have significant damaging economic consequences for the US economy specifically. Now, there are lots of other threats on the chart here. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to pick a couple of the threats that are certainly of interest to me today that I'm watching closely. But if you're interested, you have a question during our Q&A, I'm more than happy to go into additional details on any or all of these as you like. We could be here all afternoon. Number one threat I would highlight here is the stock market itself. And this may come as a bit of a surprise to you. Economists typically don't like to talk about the stock market. We're not very good at predicting it. Otherwise, we would have chosen a different profession. And in addition, the stock market historically has been a poor indicator of economic health, right? There's the old quip that the stock market has predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions, right? So it's not typically something that we will pay very close attention to. But today, I highlight it because of that dependency that we have today on those higher income households from a spending perspective. And as you can see on the chart today, the stock markets, equity markets in general remain highly overvalued or certainly richly valued by any number of metrics. On the chart, you're looking at price to earnings ratios for the S&P 500. You can see that they're elevated today. They're not the highest that they've ever been, but they are consistent with other shocks in the economy, the dot-com boom, the Great Recession, and even the pandemic. We had such elevated levels of valuation. So my concern here is that we very well could have a correction in the market given this level of valuation. And given, again, how closely tied we are to the higher income consumer and how closely tied high income consumers are to the wealth that's been generated by the stock market and the housing market, we could see consumers pulling back, high-end consumers pulling back aggressively in the face of a correction. And that could lead to broader economic harm. So I think it's worth our while to pay close attention to what's going on in the stock market to get a sense of where things might be heading with those higher income consumers and then the broader economy as well as businesses would react to any type of slowdown in spending. The other key threat that I see that bears paying close attention to, of course, would be the tariff threat and the policies coming out of Washington. And here the issue is really one of an enormous uncertainty in terms of the scope of the tariffs that are being contemplated, which countries, which products, the timing, and the duration of those tariffs. Any variation of those types of assumptions has dramatic implications in terms of the direction of the economy and my baseline outlook here. So in our view, or our current read of the situation, I should say, we see tariffs as taking really one of 2 tracks. One track is tariffs imposed on other nations in order to correct or address trade imbalances or issues. And certainly as we think about the tariffs being contemplated for China, right, we would expect that those tariffs may be imposed, that's the green line that you see on the slide here, and then maintained for an extended period of time. Right, no real chance of an agreement or a reduction of those tariffs anytime soon. On the other hand, for the rest of the world, we see tariffs being more of a negotiation instrument, where we could expect to see tariffs being increased fairly dramatically. That's the blue line that you can see here for a period of time. But then over the course of the next, say, year or so, there would be some negotiation. There would be some agreement that is worked out that may lower tariffs for U.S. exporters in the future into other markets, and we come back to some type of an equilibrium. So taking it all in, our expectation is we will have a sharp increase in tariffs in the short term, and then a modest increase in tariffs overall over the longer term. And if that's the case, the inflationary threat is relatively modest, right? There would be uncertainty, but we don't, as long as these tariffs are not broad-based, they are not instituted for an extended period of time, it should be manageable for both households and businesses. Now, I wanted to end on more of an optimistic note here, so I'll add one more upside risk to the mix here before turning things over, and that is the upside risk coming from productivity growth. Right? The last 5 years have demonstrated a productivity renaissance. Right? We've had 2% on average productivity growth, as you can see from the green line on the chart here. That is faster than the 1% productivity growth that we had prior to the pandemic, in the 5 years prior to the pandemic. And there's some good reasons to believe that productivity will continue to remain at an elevated level. There's, of course, all the excitement when it comes to AI and information technology, but there are pharmaceutical developments, right? If weight loss drugs can make our population healthier, that certainly contributes to higher productivity. There's all the research and development going on with green technologies and battery storage and energy production. So lots of things, lots of new developments that could help to increase productivity over an extended period of time here. So that's certainly a reason to be somewhat optimistic. And productivity would, of course, be the silver bullet to our economy. Higher productivity would allow us to increase wages for households, allow us to address our debt to GDP ratio issues more effectively. So we all should be celebrating or hoping for some higher productivity growth. One last point I'll make before concluding the prepared remarks here is around how we might deal with all the uncertainty that we have in the world. It's great, perhaps, that I have this risk matrix approach, and I think everyone should create their own risk matrix in terms of how you are viewing threats and how trying to organize them in your mind in terms of both the probability and severity to your own personal portfolios or your business portfolios or the organizations or governments that you may work for. But then on top of that, how do we deal with the uncertainty itself? And I think the best way to deal with uncertainty is through scenario analysis. And so you can think about running through different scenarios, again, as an exercise to understand how you might react to different issues as they come, different tariff scenarios, different immigration scenarios, what have you, and see how you might react if indeed we suddenly saw an unemployment rate that rose to 6, 8, 9, 10%. How might you adjust your portfolio, your businesses, even your personal finances? So with that, I'm going to stop there and look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Chris. Next, I'll welcome up Michael Farr, who is the Chief Market Strategist at Hightower Advisors, CEO and founder of Farr Miller in Washington, and no stranger to those of you who have been at this conference in prior years. Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. Thank you. I got to check the notes. I'm getting older. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you. Glad to be back with you again. It's fun to see a lot of the same faces every year. It's particularly nice to see yours, Dr. O'Neill. 17 years ago, I hear, you and I met to do this. And somehow, in spite of everything Harker tried to do, they keep inviting me back, which is great. Thank you. All right, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. First, please, okay, think about this before I'm going to ask you to stand up and talk to this group about tariffs, immigration, Fed policy, tax policy, and trade wars, and don't get political about it, okay? Don't piss anybody off. Is Kate here? Good, because she gets mad when I say piss off. Don't tell her I said that. Please turn off your political ears. All right, we have to talk about these things, at least from an economic point of view. It is a great honor to be here. I want to start with you all, please, and I think that just a couple of questions may be interesting, President Harker. How many of you are still concerned about inflation perhaps still creeping up? How many? Okay. It was a little over half, I think, a little over half. How many of you think that the economy's in good shape and growing? Not even half. Not even half. Because the data, ladies and gentlemen, suggests the economy's fine. It is expanding. GDP growth is positive. Things are okay. All right. Your slides were great. In fact, I've got about half of them. Good news for you all, I'll zip by them, okay? I'm going to zip by them. You don't have to listen to all of it. I loved your line. I wrote it down. I want that maybe we can worry a bit more intelligently. I like that. Think about how you could use that in every aspect of your life, like when you're watching the evening news. Okay. So in my previous year's predictions, have said that the chance we would go into a recession over the past 3 or 4 years was really high. Really high. All of the indicators. The chance that the Fed would actually do this soft landing thing, historically it's like 15 to 20%. So you tell a money manager that there's 80% chance of this and 20% chance of that. Look, I'm not the PhD economist. These guys are. You know, this dumbass says, I'm going with the 80%. I was wrong. Wrong. That's it. I've said it enough. I'm not going to say it a third time. You guys got it. You didn't get it perfectly, but you got it. And we're still okay. We're still okay. How do you sit there on the Federal Reserve? Think if you were on the Federal Reserve. Think if you had to go sit in that meeting and you're watching the data come in and all of a sudden you hear there's a new 50% on tariffs on steel in Canada and this and that and the other thing. There's a what? There's a what? And it's going to what? Oh, don't forget eggs are $8 a dozen. I checked in on this. See, just because I've had a house in Delaware for 30 years, you don't intuitively learn this stuff. The eating hens and broilers and chickens, you can raise those in about 8 weeks. It takes 20 weeks, 22 weeks to get a laying hen. So we'll get through it. We'll get through it, but the supply is a little longer in the coming. Politics. Oh, I'm going to shoot him. When politics collide with economics, I taught high school English when I got out of college. They'd take back the degree. It wasn't University of Delaware. Don't worry. Don't worry. All right. I've hired UD people. Okay. It's been hugely resilient. And by the way, I gave a longer version of this speech a week ago, Friday, in Miami Beach at the World Economic Summit for YPO, a Young Presidents Organization. Wilbur Ross gave his presentation, and then I gave mine. And Wilbur Ross stood up and said, don't worry about everything. Trump's in control. It's all good. So if you left then, you felt better than after you listened to my presentation, okay? I think, I don't know. Economic policies in the new administration are unlikely to support further disinflation. We're tossing it up here. President Trump said the American people understand that we've got to fight back on China, we've got to do these tariffs, and they are ready to have a certain period of pain to deal with this unfair policies that have been going on for a while. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure at all that American voters are actually ready to deal with pain in the wallet. It's a great notion until you have to go and pay, another $100 at the grocery store. Concerns about fiscal profligacy are also intensifying. Inflation concerns, I think, could keep higher for longer. So with great and due respect, I'm going to suggest we don't see another rate cut this year. I'm going to suggest that there's a greater chance, given the uncertainty, of another rate hike before we see another rate cut. Is that crazy? I don't know. I've been wrong about the other stuff. I might be wrong about that. But if this inflation continues to heat up, the Fed at some point, no matter how stoic and data dependent they choose to be, they may reach a point where they feel they have to do something. Economic policies will have more ambiguous impact on growth. Stocks are fully valued. I completely agree. I'm going to show you some of that. And earnings estimates. Earnings estimates remain really optimistic. Okay, contributions. These are really bright slides. That was the other problem with this room. We were in this dark room. The average age was about deceased at this group I spoke with last week. I am telling you. One of the guys said, the people at, I shouldn't say this. Okay, Kate's not here. This one guy said, he said, this is an old group. You've got to make these slides brighter. Here you go, blind. You couldn't read them. You couldn't read them. He said, this is an old group. I'm going to skip the line that Kate would get upset with. Okay. Consumer spending, GDP growth during the Biden years was 3.2%. Did you know that? Some of you were going, yes, I knew that. All right. What a lousy sales team this guy had. I mean, if it is indeed the economy stupid, somebody should have been selling that a little bit better. But actually, Chris went over it, Dr. deRitis went over this, and he showed you the problem. It's not just the economy stupid. We forgot one key thing. It's also the inflation stupid. It's also the inflation stupid, and when inflation goes above incomes, people don't vote for you. Here, non-farm payrolls, we talked about that. It's on the uptick. Unemployment claims, it's okay. But the consumer spending has been a strong labor market. That's been the key. Do we still have a strong labor market? Yes, we do. Look, the U.S. economy's 2/3 consumer driven. 2/3 consumer driven. Does the consumer still have money? Chris showed you some of the credit card balances and some of the 90-day delinquencies. I've got some of that. I'm going to move over it. Average hourly earnings, this is it. See the orange blip above the line? That's the problem. That's the inflation. That's the inflation above the incomes. You've got higher costs rising faster than you've got your income rising, and that hurts those average Americans who went to the poll. Average hourly earnings now, prices grew faster than those wages for 2 years. Increase in interest rates starting to have an impact, especially on lower income. Consumer savings rate. Here's what I want you to think about. Does the consumer have money in their pockets to keep spending? If it's not in their pockets, how do they keep spending? Credit cards. Credit cards. Or maybe a second home loan, but they don't want to do that anymore because the interest rates are too high on mortgage rates. So consumer savings rate down. These are credit cards, credit card balances. That's it. Up 42% in 4 years. Savings rate down. This is up. Boom. That's it. Okay? Balance of 30-day delinquencies. My chart's a little bit different. I don't show the happy downtrend at the end. I didn't find it. I use Federal Reserve Bank in New York. I should have gone to Moody's. Better chart, right? Better chart. Okay. But they're falling behind. You know, I talk to these YPO people, young presidents, and these were old presidents. My God, they were old presidents at this thing. Well, we were in Miami Beach. I mean, you know, what do you want? But this was a wealthy group. And I looked in this room, and it's always informative to me when I do that. I said, can you all picture going to bed tonight without $10,000 in savings you could put your hands on? Could you do that? And no one in this room looked at me like, what? You don't have $10,000 in cash? No, I can't imagine that. Good. Can you imagine not having $1,000? Can you imagine having a credit card bill that you've had for months on end? A big balance. Let's say you owe $10,000 on your credit card bill. You don't have $1,000 in cash, and you've got to go to. What if you didn't make the minimum payment for 90 days? What if you had a credit card bill and hadn't made a minimum payment in 90 days? Well, for auto or credit card, you'd be with these guys. How would that feel? We know about behavioral economics. We know when you feel good, you spend money. So if you listen to what Chris was saying, and if you listen to what Dr. Harker was saying, you can't spend what you don't have. Can consumer spending continue to drive the economy? They talked about sources of wealth and stock indices, S&P 500. Those are the FANGs. FANGs are 34% of the S&P 500 right now. How about that? NVIDIA killed it. Killed it. And the stock's off today. Stock's off today. Couldn't have, I don't think they could have had, you couldn't have made up better numbers than they came up with today. Spending by income group. I, years ago, talked to you about the velocity of money, that there wasn't enough money, that problems, there might be a social problem in saying, look, the wealthy are getting wealthier, high income earners are earning more incomes, but the bottom 50% of this country is getting left behind. They don't have more money, they don't have more wages, they do have higher fixed costs. Well, I said, we got to get more money in more hands so we can keep money moving in the market. Actually, now rich people are spending more. Rich people are spending more. It's up to 50%, that top 10% of earners now spending 50% of all money out there. Inflation expectations have stopped falling. I'm a little worried about that. We saw that here today. We did our own survey, right? Inflation expectations have stopped falling. Some think they're going to continue to rise. At least you're worried about it. This is a New York Fed survey and University of Michigan surveys, 1 year or 5 to 10 years, 3 to 5 years. Peter Lynch says any 8th grader can read a chart, right? Is it doing this or is it doing that? Good enough. What's it doing? Okay, I'm moving. S&P 500, to your point, it's not cheap. If it's 22 times earnings, if the company has $1 in earnings and it's trading for $22 a share on the market, how's it going to go up next year? How's it going to go up 10% next year? How's it going to rise $2.20 next year? It's either, on a price to earnings basis, it's either going to increase 10% in earnings and still trade at that 22 multiple, right? 10% in earnings and a 22 multiple static, and it goes up 10%. Or no earnings increase, these are two, and the multiple goes up. We pay more for it. Do you really think markets are going to pay more than 22 times earnings? 22. Are we really going to go to 24? Maybe. We've done it before. But so things are either going to get more expensive in this particular environment, or they're going to earn more money. So what are earnings estimates? What do we think the S&P 500? This is analysts. This is from FactSet and Bloomberg. So in an environment where we have okay, Carlos, GDP for 2025, what do you think? Growth, 2 point what? 2.4? It's a good number, 2.5, 2.4, 2.6, go anywhere in there, right? Works. You got GDP growth, the economy growing at 2.5. That's not bad. We're moving in the right direction. We're still in that expansionary phase. That's a very normal number historically. You're going to get 12.6% earnings growth. We've had 2 years back-to-back of over 20% returns in the S&P 500. Cool, right? You don't get 3 very often. And it's got to get more expensive. And you think the next 2 years, add them together, we're going to get 26% out of the stock market and earnings in the next 2. You're going to really be able to put that. You're hearing a bit of a cautionary tone from Moody's. And if you listen, I think even more to what Dr. Harker may say later, I want to tell you, he hasn't called me today to ask me what to do. He usually calls me on a daily basis, said, what do you think I should do at the Fed today? It's a bit of a burden, I got to tell you, but he's a good guy. I like him. We've been doing this for later. It is such a great honor. And do you know that my first one of these, you weren't here, but to have known you and what you've done for this university, what you've done for this bank, what you've done in service for the United States, it is such a great honor to know you, and I thank you very, very much. And he lets me tease him, which is great. So far, he lets me tease him. I haven't crossed the line. Fundamentals matter. If you're going to own stocks, you got to know what you own. I've been managing stocks for 37 years and billions of dollars for other people's money and institutions and stuff. This is the stuff I own. This is the stuff that Buffett likes to own. I'm going fast. Jen said I couldn't do this in 15 minutes. I think 4 to 5% in earnings growth is the long-term kind of average. It wouldn't kill me to have 7% at all this year, but I think it could be a bumpier ride. We haven't seen a stock market correction significant in a while. So high inflation coming back, tariffs increases, interest rates, credit bubbles, unrestrained deficit spending, complacency. God, complacency is scary. I want to tell you something else. When you look at the GDP growth of the past couple of years, there are two elements, of course, when you look at GDP growth. It's the hours worked, the workforce plus productivity. Boom, GDP growth. We've had a great rise in the workforce, in the labor force. Where has it come from? Not organic growth in the U.S. Immigration. Immigration. It's a big number the past couple of years. Most of the growth, 95% of the growth in the workforce has come from immigration. Not happening. So, when Chris tells you that the holy grail of possibility and promise for our economy is AI productivity, take that to the bank. And I think we might see it. And it could be remarkable and it could be fabulous, and say a prayer that it is so. But that's what we need, and we can't get complacent. And I have the forecast, and I send out market commentary every week. I want to say one more word, if I may, because, yeah, basically I'm done. David Lyons, years ago, asked me to do this for the first time, and it was a great privilege to come with Professor O'Neill and sit with you all, some of you. I had dark hair back then. I blame Lyons. And I said, what are you doing, David? He said, well, it's for the Center for Entrepreneurship, Economic Education and Entrepreneurship. I said, yeah, what is it? And he explained it. And I said, why are you doing that? He said, this is really important for the community. This is really important for the state. This is really important for our country to really teach young people about entrepreneurship, to teach them about economic value so that they understand the importance of what really holds our country up, the infrastructure and the architecture on which we've been built for generations. And he said, I really want to help, Michael. Every year I come up here with your great graces. Thank you for inviting me back. I think about David Lyons, my really good friend, who years ago told me how important it was to make a difference. And David, my friend, you made a big difference. Hey, and congratulations on the sale. That's really cool. All right. Thank you all very much.
All right, so we've got about 35 minutes. I'm going to ask some questions. There are questions being submitted online, which I will also work in here. But Pat, I will start with you, since this is our last shot at you before you move on. So every quarter, you and your colleagues put down a forecast of what you think the economy will do and where interest rates would go under appropriate policy for that forecast. The last time you all did this exercise was in December. Most of your colleagues had written down 2 cuts for 2025.
Yeah.
I'll just ask you, was that in line with your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, at that time I was on the fence between 1 and 2.
Okay.
You know, if I could do 1.5, I would have done it, but I couldn't. I think right now it really is a difficult forecast. I mean, I think, Chris, it's very difficult to forecast right now. There's so much uncertainty. So at this point, I think, I think about forecasting in terms of not nailing it, what's in the future, but what's the best decision I can make today, given what I most likely think is going to happen tomorrow. What I most likely think is going to happen tomorrow is uncertainty, right? In the sense that I don't exactly know how all this is going to transpire. Nobody knows for sure right now. So at that point, I think I am in the camp of, at least for now, let's stay where we are. Let's see some of this unfold. We'll get some more information. Now, things could break with these 2 inflation reports and so forth. But barring any substantial change that I would see in those reports between now and the next meeting, I think sitting here for a little bit and letting some of this uncertainty resolve itself is the appropriate thing. Now, what that means for many quarters out, that's very difficult. Now, I have to put an SEP in, right? I mean, that is,
write something down.
but it's going to be real. I mean, the uncertainty is going to be very high. I mean, I think we have to recognize that going into this, none of us in the profession can say for sure what's going to happen.
The Fed can cut for good reasons, and the Fed can cut for bad reasons, right?
Sure.
I mean, last year, they were fairly benign reasons behind that cut. Inflation was coming down to your goal. Most of your colleagues thought policy was tight, quite tight, at 5.25% to 5.5%.
Right.
And the labor market looked maybe a little bit wobbly on the margins, but nothing too scary. My question now, though, because the market's kind of looking ahead and saying, gee, what if prices end up being stickier because of tariffs and some of these things on the supply side of the economy? So you don't get the progress on inflation this year, but you get some chill in the economy from the uncertainty. We saw that in 2019, right, with the trade war, and the Fed cut 3 times in 2019. How would you take on a situation where you're seeing growth now that's weaker than what you expect, but you're not getting any lower on inflation? Is there a case for cutting? I'm sure
Into that,
at some level there is, but how do you?
There may be a case for cutting in that scenario, but again, I think where we are right now, I believe we're restrictive. This gets into a wonky thing about what our star is, but I think we are restrictive still. And so I think we just let some of this ride. Like as I said in my prepared remarks, let's just I mean, if you're in the middle of a storm in the ocean with choppy waters and a big fog, you don't go full steam ahead, right? It's just not the time to do. And I think we're in a situation where it's hard to see what we do. I'd never say never to anything right now. You can't, right? In a policy position, you can never say you'd never do that. But right now, I think we just need to let this resolve. Now, take tariffs. We know that if it's just a one-time thing, it's a one-time price rise, and it has a different effect on inflation than it goes up. It hurts people, but it's not going to be a continual increase in prices. But if we get into the trade war, as you were talking about, that's a different story, where things are ratcheting up. The other issue that Michael brought up, tariffs are one inflationary possibility. The other is, though, the labor market. And if the labor market, we're losing people in the labor market, and we're already starting to hear some stories of people having trouble where people aren't showing up for work. If that continues, but that could have a real effect. I mean, you think about the industries here in this state in particular, I think about the industries here, that could have a real effect. How much? It all depends on how it transpires. I mean, this is one where details matter, how it's implemented matters. I mean, I think you can't, I am not in the camp of saying you can make blanket statements that are going to hold for all time. It's just not the case here. I mean, it really matters the details, what's going to happen.
So, Chris, let me bring you in.
Yeah.
You had said you expect the Fed to cut later this year, I think September, as just a placeholder forecast. Right. What do you see happening that brings the Fed back into lowering interest rates this year?
I think exactly the scenario that was described or that you put out here, and that we're going to be right in that gray zone where, my baseline forecast is that inflation is gradually coming down, but very gradual, right? But then the labor market is weakening, right? And you do get those growth fears creeping in, and that is the condition where, now it's a tough decision. It's a tough call in terms of on which side of the line to fall. But I do think, well, under my baseline at least, that those growth considerations kind of outweigh the inflation considerations at that point. That there'll be enough evidence that inflation is coming in, even though it's still high. But then the real concern will be the labor market starting to crumble. And especially if those, again, I come back to the higher income households, if they are wobbly as well, then that will put that growth pressure even under more scrutiny.
So Michael, last night the president announced 25% tariffs are coming on the European Union. This morning he said the 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico that are set to kick in next week that he had paused for a month are definitely going to happen. And he said he's going to do another 10% tariff on China on top of the 10% that went into effect earlier this month. At what point do you think the market begins to react to that? And I should note that we did have a down day. I think the S&P was down 2%. NASDAQ was a little bit worse. At what point do you think the market reacts to that? And do you think that's going to influence the White House and lead them at some point to back off on any of this?
The market hates uncertainty and hates to be surprised, and that's all this administration has for us, a lot of uncertainty. And look, you don't know. The problem with President Trump is that he makes bombastic comments, and you can't tell if he's doing it for effect or if he's doing it for policy. And when I say he makes bombastic comments, yeah, no, I don't like them. I'll tell you personally, I don't like the bombastic comments, but they can be effective. The threats can be effective. People will come to the table and negotiate. And I talked with, who the hell did I talk to? God. They were in Davos in the room. This was a friend of mine who, yes, CEO of he doesn't want me to use his name. He was in Davos, he was in the room when President Trump came on to address the Economic Council at Davos, and I was talking to him, I said, no, I understood what he said. Tell me what the other world leaders did. What was the reaction when President Trump came on? And they said, you could see that he was making some angry, but in general the tone was nobody wanted to become the focus of his ire. They were like, guy's a jerk. I didn't say that out loud. It was that kind of a thing. That, by the way, is in the mood in Washington. I was at a series of dinners 3 weeks ago in D.C., one of which was in the Capitol building. There were, I don't know, maybe 40 people there. There were 8 senators in the room, plus other folks. People might say that they disagree with President Trump in private. These are mostly Republicans, too. But they don't want to be saying it in public. So to answer your question, tariffs are taxes. Sooner or later, they increase the costs of things because they get passed on to the consumer sooner or later. You just don't know whether you're actually going to see them or not. And for how long, you don't know. So they can be very disruptive to markets. They were today. This is a real wait and see. Everybody needs to be from Missouri now. Show me. Really show me. And gosh, that's hard when you see the NASDAQ fall 2% in a day and you go back to the Federal Reserve and you go, stock markets are crashing, President Harker. What do you want to do? I want to wait.
So Chris, let me ask you, to the extent that we do see more tariffs, in what ways are the underlying conditions of the economy that President Trump is inheriting for his second term different from what he had 8 years ago? And in what ways could that make life maybe more complicated for Pat and his colleagues at the Fed?
I think simply put, it's the inflation situation that we have now versus then. It's entirely different, right? We are at elevated levels of inflation. We're fighting to get it down, Nothing's really working all that effectively at the moment. Now you throw tariffs on top of that. It's a very different picture than what we had under Trump 1.0, right? There we had some room to maneuver, if you will. We're actually wanting to get inflation up a bit higher at that point. Today it's a very different part of the cycle. And I think the key is that you have businesses and consumers now who have lived through this experience of higher inflation are just so in tune with it as well. And as we know, inflation expectations matter even more than the inflation itself, right? So
why is that? For people, inflation expectations, what is that, and why does it matter so much?
Yeah, so inflation, simply as the words describe, it's just the expectation or the belief that, or the the view that inflation is either going to go up or going to go down, right? And we can try to measure that in various ways. We look at bond markets. We can look at the difference between, say, the yield on a 5-year Treasury security and a Treasury inflation-protected security, a TIPS security, and we can see that that so-called break-even rate is elevated now, and we have investors predicting or assuming that there will be higher levels of inflation over the next 5 years than we've had previously. Some of the data I think you showed, Mike, on the slide in terms of consumers, looking at University of Michigan or other surveys, they also are indicating, maybe the magnitude is wrong, but at least the direction, they're anticipating that inflation is going to go up, not down, right? And the issue is that those inflation expectations can get built into the psychology of consumers, and they can start taking actions, or businesses can start taking actions, anticipating that the inflation is going to be there, and start to induce the inflation itself by taking those actions.
And in fact, 3 years ago, when expectations really began to move, that was when the Fed really ramped up rate hikes, right? We saw the 75 basis point hike in June of 22, and then 3 more after that, which was sort of not what people were expecting when you all did the first one, Pat. So,
May I just tag team just on that? For a consumer, if you think prices are going up and you're inclined to buy a refrigerator now, because the refrigerator is a classic economic example, right? You're inclined to buy a refrigerator now, you think inflation's coming and it's going to go up, you'll buy now. If you think we're going to have disinflation or deflation, where prices actually go lower, you're going to wait.
so the price setting can be self-fulfilling.
Yes, because it gets everybody out saying, I think prices are going up, so we all want to buy a refrigerator, and that drives the price of refrigerators higher, and boom, you've got the inflation you thought you were going to have.
So Pat, what do you make of some of these? The University of Michigan survey, for example, showed a notable increase in both 1 year ahead and a little bit of an increase in 5 year ahead, and that one doesn't move quite as much. What do you make of some of these surveys?
So I think you have to combine that with what we're seeing the consumers saying about sentiment broadly. So I think, yeah, there's the inflation surveys, but there's also, I think this is all part of a package of the consumers getting nervous. I mean, I think there's a broad nervousness, right? That they're seeing all this news, and they're seeing stories of big trade wars and global conflicts and all sorts of things happening in our society. And the natural inclination is, yeah, I think things are not as good as they were. That's a sentiment issue. And yet prices have to be going up. I mean, it's all part of the general package of nervousness and fear that is starting to creep in, which is really interesting because, again, if you look at consumers right now, the job market does remain pretty healthy. Yeah, it takes longer to find a job, but most people are still able to do that. Layoffs continue to be, except for this one reading, they continue to be not high, but people are nervous. I think there's just a broad nervousness. And given all that's going on with layoffs in the federal sector and other things going on, it just adds to that level of nervousness. And so the natural thing to think about in that is, well, yeah, everything's just going in the wrong direction, and inflation is one of those things that's going to go in the wrong direction. I think that's part of it. I don't think that's the whole thing, but I think that is definitely part of it.
But if people are nervous, if we're worried about this adaptive expectation story, right?
Sure.
People think prices are going to be higher, so they go out and buy. If they're nervous, though, if I'm nervous about economic conditions 6 months from now, maybe you don't have to worry so much about this self-fulfilling. I mean, when you look at the expectations number, I guess, does it make you say, oh, geez, we went through a lot of work to get inflation here, and now we're seeing this go the other way? Or if I guess what I'm saying, if people are nervous, maybe you don't worry so much about what some of these expectations numbers.
No, you got to continue to worry about them because Chris is right. We cannot let inflation expectations get really unanchored. This is where, again, we're starting to see this tick up. We need to give it a little more time to see where it's going to land. I mean, it's clearly one of the risks I'm worried about. And this is why I don't think at this point we should take any action off the table. I'm not saying we should take action now. I'm pretty clear on let's just let some of this uncertainty resolve itself. But we could move in either direction. I mean, that's possible.
There's a clear cutting bias, though, in the communications we've seen from your colleagues in the projections that I alluded to earlier. What do you think it would take for you to say, all right, maybe the next move should be, as Michael said, not saying you're going to hike, but that the bias would be towards being in a hiking posture as opposed to a cutting posture?
Yeah, again, I think where we are right now is the steady as she goes posture. And I think that is the appropriate place to be.
And what do you hear from businesses when you talk to CEOs, purchasing managers about what they may do if input prices rise?
Yeah, we're starting to get some contacts. We have a series of contacts, and one has already been dealing with, for a while, steel tariff issues, and so far they're able to pass some of that along. I mean, so they're able to continue to do this. I think it really varies by business sector. I mean, we're still building data centers. we're still investing in the electrical grid. There's things that we're going to keep doing even if the prices have gone up some. So it varies, and we look at our manufacturing business outlook survey that we do at the Philadelphia Fed. It's still in positive territory. I mean, it's still above our recessionary average. So it really went up last month, but it's come down some, but it's still positive. So they're not signaling, at least the manufacturers we're looking at, they're not signaling that things are really bad. They're expecting prices paid are going to go up. But at this point, we're not seeing any real serious, I'm not hearing it, real serious concern. Because, and this is where we are, we don't know how much of this will actually occur, right? And so they are in the same position we're in. Let's just let this go, except for the things we know we got to get done. Like, we got a contract to build a data center. We're building a data center. If the steel costs more, we're going to get the steel to put it up.
So, Michael, you had a list of worries in your golden goose slide. The Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, has said he's focused on getting the 10-year Treasury yield down. He's not going to comment on what the Fed does with the overnight price of money. He wants to see the 10-year yield come down because things like mortgages tend to price off of longer dated instruments. Where do you see the 10-year yield at the end of the year? Higher than where we are today, lower?
Geez, you can't ask the other guys these questions. Jeez.
I think Chris had it in his slide, right? He already answered it.
Slide, and he thinks it's probably at about the right level. It seems to be at the right level, though you would expect if the Fed starts to actually cut rates and gets into somewhat more, we don't have to call it an accommodative cycle because President Harker said that he thinks the policy is still on the restrictive side of things. So even on the way back to neutral to lower the short rates, you would expect to see the 10-year follow a bit in a normalized curve. So, but we're absolutely within a half a point of probably where we should be. Probably.
So you're not looking for big move up or down. There are some people who are on the record calling for a 5% 10-year.
No, I don't see that. And I think if you also look at mortgage rates on a normalized spread, they should probably be lower. Mortgage rates should be lower relative to where the 10-year is. So mortgage rates, you had a slide, I think.
Yep.
Somewhere around 6.5% would be more normal now, maybe even 6.25%, but we're not there yet because banks don't have to do it. But you also saw in today's numbers, people aren't buying those mortgages. Maybe the banks are just as happy.
So we've talked a lot about trade and tariffs. I want to ask Chris on immigration. So a big story last year, the year before, you guys noted, was we had a lot of immigration. We saw job growth sort of surprising. People thought it would slow down, and the monthly payroll numbers kept coming in strong. But the unemployment rate was ticking up because we were seeing an increase in the supply of labor. So going ahead, do you think that the break-even pace of job growth, that is the number of jobs you'd need every month to keep the unemployment rate steady, is that also going to come down? And if it does, I mean, we could be in a situation where we see job growth slowing. Would that necessarily be a sign of concern, or would that just be changes in labor supply?
Changes in labor, so it's baked into my forecast, right? So I didn't show it, but yeah, we project monthly job growth to be closer to 100,000,
Yeah.
right? 80, 100,000
Yep.
even. There could be even months where we see negatives, right? Especially with the job cuts that are going on now. So that's more of the normalization that we see. My fear, and that does assume that certainly the slowdown in immigration, it does assume some accelerated deportations. But if that were to accelerate, if we're wrong, and there's much more of an exodus, that I see as a true risk factor to the economy in terms of the overall growth. If the labor isn't there, right, that becomes a real problem. That we could actually end up with more of those wage pressures once again building up, and so that's clearly something to watch as well.
How about you, Michael?
I mean, absolutely. I think that this market could get tighter. I'm sorry, this might sound like a political comment. I was talking with half my clients, we manage $2.5 billion. Half my clients love President Trump and thinks that this is the beginning of a new day, and finally this is great, and we are just absolutely thrilled. And I get off of that phone call and I talk to one of my Democratic clients, and they want to leave the country, and their hair's on fire, and the world's coming to an end, and they want to sell everything. So, you know, it's hard, but one of them was saying, we need to bring manufacturing back to this country, and we need more jobs in this country. And I said, no, we don't. No. It sounds, I suppose, very anti-American. We got a 4% unemployment rate. I don't need more jobs. I need more workers. I don't need more jobs. I need more workers. And I don't need to bring manufacturing back to this country if it can be done for half the cost somewhere else. Because as soon as I do it, the prices at Walmart go up, and I've got the inflation we've been trying to fight, and I've got higher prices for the bottom 50% of this country who are struggling to afford life as it is. So what's happening with immigration, I understand. Believe me, I promise you, I have an American flag on every one of my houses. It's odd I don't have a pin today. I love this country with every fiber in my being. We need a successful economy. There was a nun who ran a big hospital system up in Bakerfest in Rhode Island, and there was a big argument on the board. They wanted to expand the mission, and the business people said, no, we can't afford it. And the nuns got very upset, and she settled the argument. She said, sisters, no margin, no mission. No margin, no mission. Somebody should tell Xi Jinping that, by the way. We have to have a strong economy if we're going to have a strong country. And we have to have workers, period. So figure out a way to make them legal, figure out a way to make them educated, figure out a way to improve our education system. We need to be stronger than the trend has got to get reversed in here. Sorry, there's my stump speech. And I'm not running for office.
Thank you. So Pat, you said in your remarks you think policy is still restrictive, meaning putting downward pressure on inflation, slowing growth. What evidence do you see? What evidence would you point to that policy's tight? Because sometimes people in the market will say, gee, stocks at a record, credit spread's very tight. Some of these financial conditions indexes don't suggest that policy's all that tight. What are you seeing that suggests, yeah, actually, it's working, it's doing its thing?
Well, it's clearly slowed down. I mean, what we're seeing is a sense that there has been a gradual slowdown back to trend. I mean, where we're heading is pretty much back to trend, and whether that's in the labor market, GDP, slowly but surely, inflation, and we'll see, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty around that, but barring all the things we're talking about. And by the way, one of the things when you're in the policy world, you can't make policy on hypotheticals, you got to make it on facts. And we live in a world of hypotheticals right now. There's lots of hypotheticals floating around, and you just can't make decisions that way. I mean, you have to take that into account that there's that uncertainty, but you know, maybe market players will do that, right, and bet on which direction it's going to go, but that's not what we need to do. We need to focus on facts. So things seem to be moving in the right direction, and the main thing that we've seen is even though it's gotten, it has slowed the decrease in inflation. Your chart was a really important chart, that absent shelter and food and energy, which we know is very volatile. So take core or super core services, right, or however you want to call it. There's many names floating around in the profession right now. Things look okay, although there's been that uptick. Shelter has been stubborn, and it's been stubborn for lots of reasons. But if you look at any real-time rent indices, as you alluded to, take your favorite, Zillow, whoever, they're moving down. There are certain markets where that's not true, but so at some point, shelter has to start to move down. We still have issues when it comes to single-family homes and those issues. There's a supply issue there as well as the lock-in effect of mortgages. So all that's true. But again, if you look at rents and you look at the things that are not, so there's two measures we typically look at, with respect to inflation: real prices of stuff, and that is, I had a friend who retired and he went to work doing the following for the U.S. government, going into grocery stores and taking pictures of prices of stuff. That's actually how they do it, right? They go in and look at real prices, or ones that we can infer, right? That we calculate. I tend to put a little more emphasis on the ones that had somebody go stare at a label at the grocery store than the things we infer, because we know there's some problems with those calculations, particularly when things are moving in ways it's not normal. So, we've seen inflation move the way we want, although, again, it has leveled off here for a little bit. There are all these risks to it. So that would give you a sense that the labor market's slowed down some, as we would expect. Inflation, although it's bumpy, it's continuing to move down. I'm not saying we're really restrictive. I think we're in a restrictive stance. There is a big debate in the economics profession right now of where's the neutral rate, right? Where should we stop? The answer is you don't know it. You only know it in hindsight. You can't know it ahead of time. And it all gets down again to this wonky thing about R star, the neutral rate, real rate. Estimates vary all over the place on that one. I mean, some people, again, think that we're in this new productivity boom. It's going to last forever, and AI is going to, we can talk about that too. I have my own views on that. But I think it is mildly restrictive, and that's the right place to be right now.
You write down every quarter a long run. People saying, I'll use that as a proxy for neutral.
Right.
How has your estimate changed over time for that variable?
Not a lot. I mean, it's changed a little bit, but not a lot. I mean, I still am in the camp that I ask myself the following question. Go back before the pandemic, all this, what's fundamentally changed in the U.S. economy? Yes, AI has changed, and there's been some policy issues, but in sort of the fundamentals of the U.S. economy, the demographic shifts that we were seeing were there then, that are there now. All those things were continuing to happen. But is there a huge fundamental shift that would dramatically change that neutral rate? Could be, but
higher debt?
Well, that's one of them. That's another story we could talk about. I don't go into the fiscal side of the world, but other than to say it is concerning. It is concerning. And so there are those issues, but those issues have been building for a while. It's not like it was a sudden shift.
Michael, you want to jump in?
How material can that productivity add on from AI be? You said you had your own estimates.
Well, So let me say, every year there's a gathering of economists in meetings at the American Economic Association. This year they're in San Francisco. It is the ultimate nerd fest if you want to go. And I was there, and the AI sessions were packed to the gills of people debating the future of work, what it means for the economy. And the thing I took from that, as one speaker said at the very last session, these are our best guesses, but we really don't know. And I think that's where the profession is right now. It's all over the map in terms of thinking about what this impact will be. There's a lot of hype, and this is where I kind of step back. If you look at economic history, we've gone through technology hype cycles every time. We get the boom, we get a little bit of a bust, then it comes back and there's some useful stuff that we can do. The question isn't, does it improve productivity? We have to have technology improve productivity to stay on our trend. Does it improve productivity in a step function above what we'd normally expect? And then people will point to, well, yeah, but call center reps get more efficient. That's true. And other things get more efficient. But go on a factory floor. Factory floors have been using technology, right, for a long time, and advanced technology, AI, and so forth for a long time. So this is not a new phenomena. We've woken up to it because of ChatGPT and large language models. There's all other kinds of AI that's already being deployed and has been deployed for years that has improved productivity, keeping us on trend. It could be that we will see a step function change. But it's not obvious that that's the case. And I can tell you, that was the consensus. Yeah, jobs will change. Jobs are going to be lost. New jobs will be created. There'll be whoever knew you needed a prompt engineer, right? How to train AI. This was not a job we had just a few years ago. Now we have this job. So I think we have to be a little cautious thinking that this is going to change our work. It's going to change our society. Technology has done that throughout the course of us being on this planet. And we get these accelerations, and then it slows down. Then we get another acceleration, slows down. So we'll see. I will put myself firmly in the camp of, I'm a little skeptical that we're going to see this dramatic and sustained increase. Because history says that we kind of bump around the trend, but the trend continues over a long period of time.
Chris, what do you think? I want to bring you in. Do you think, I mean, you have a slide showing maybe that's an upside risk here. Productivity gets better. Does that mean that we could actually end up in a world where interest rates are a little bit higher than they used to be because of this productivity spurt? Possibly.
But so I'll classify myself as a productivity bull, right? So I am optimistic, and not just because of AI. And I don't see AI having I don't attribute the productivity growth that we've seen over the last few years to AI. I don't expect AI to have a real effect over the next few years. I think it's much more of a long-term factor. But there are other things going on in the economy in terms of the labor markets becoming more efficient, in terms of the other research and development that's going on. So I think the key point I would make here is that we don't need it'd be great if we had sustained 3% productivity growth due to all this technology, right? That would solve an enormous number of problems. But we actually don't need, we only need a quarter point to really make already quite a bit of difference, right? So I think that is attainable if you sum up all the different technologies that are out there.
But I want to say, because Michael, you said something earlier that's really important. Growth is productivity plus growth in the number of people. All developed economies, that second variable is going down.
Yes.
Right? And so just to stay on our growth path we need, if that's going down, it's not flat, it's going down, we're going to need to have productivity above trend. That does not mean we're going to see this burst of overall output. It may mean we're just staying on trend.
I know Jen is going to throw something at us, but I want to say something to you, because it's 5 o'clock, I'm sorry.
We're almost out of time.
I just want to say one thing to you. Thank you. He doesn't get covered in this. This is truly, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't read his article every week, you can't be an economist and you can't be in my business. Every day you need to read Nick's column. He is one of the most trusted journalists in this country, period, and he deserves to be if you read his column. What he says about the Fed, wherever his sources come from, is very important and very significant. If you've listened to his questions, they are probative, they are thoughtful, they are as good as I get any. How many of these things you do a year? These are some of the, you are awesome.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't even pay him to say that. I couldn't think of a better way to end it, so I'll leave it at that. And I'll invite David up.
Hey, it is now evening now, so good evening, everyone. And after I finish closing out, there will be drinks outside and some food to eat. But I just wanted to thank our speakers tonight, President Harker. Just echoing what Michael said, thank you for all the great work you've done in the state of Delaware, and thank you again for all your service to the country. So thank you very much. Chris, it was wonderful to have you here for the first time. Thank you so much for contributing today. And Michael, as always, thank you for being the great entertainment you are on stage and providing all that knowledge. So, Nick, and thank you again for representing the Wall Street Journal here today. This event always takes a lot of time to put on, so I wanted to thank the good folks at the Center of the University of Delaware, Carlos and Jennifer. Where's Jennifer? She's not here? Okay. And then from Lyons and NFP, Jen Miller, thank you very much, and all the folks at Lyons who volunteered today to be here to help put on the event. And, just as I stand up here and as I was sitting down and just looking around the room, seeing friends, colleagues, clients, leaders in our community, one of the things I just couldn't stop thinking about was when I looked over at my brother Tim, just the confused and baffled look on his face as he tried to grasp the concepts that were discussed up here. So have a wonderful evening, everyone. I hope you stick around for some drinks. Thank you.
It's a little rough.